Hey folks, in today's video I'll be talking about how to build a miniature with painting in mind, and this video is sponsored by Hero Forge. So if you're planning on hand painting your own miniature that you built in Hero Forge, here are a few things to keep in mind as you're building the mini so you don't get yourself into any tight spots. Before we dive into the mini, make sure you hit that subscribe button because we make videos here every week about tabletop RPGs and our other geeky interests. Alright, let's dive into the screen recording. Alright, to start us off, I'm just going to hit the random button. Let's see what it gets us. Randomize. Helps if I actually click on the button. Ooh, that's a big boy. Yeah, let's go with a big one. All right, and this is cool because it already brings in wings and tail, which I wanted to talk about. Okay, so let's start off with wings. If you're going to have a mini that has wings on it, you want to keep those in mind, how they're posed, to make your life a lot easier. So this actually is pretty good. As you move the mini around, you can see, you're not going to have a lot of difficulty getting in here and painting this mini. Really, the only tough spot is going to be just kind of right down in here. But if we look at some other wing options, a lot of these extra large wings actually are designed pretty well with painting in mind. So let's look at some of these like folded, cute, adorable Cupid wings. So with these, you want to be careful as you're building out the mini, trying to get this like underside. It's going to be tough. And you can even see just as I'm moving the mini around on the screen, it's a little hard to see. These open feather wings are pretty good. Here's a larger size to show you. So yeah, getting here, getting these bottom bits, you're just going to have less options, and that's where you're going to want to be mindful of how the arms are posed in relation to the wing. So let's stick with, yeah, these were the original ones, but I do want to add a cloak in, so I'm going to get rid of the wings to show you the cloak. Let's go ahead into gear and add the cloak. So yeah, these shorter cloaks you're going to have less of an issue with, but you are going to have a hard time getting into that back there. But with some of these longer cloaks, especially if you have a tail on your mini, it's going to be a bit difficult to get in there. Now, you can get around this by maybe choosing a different pose. This pose is pretty good for cloaks because it does kind of flow away from the body quite a bit, while the body kind of goes in an opposite direction, so that gives you a little bit more options to kind of get your paintbrush in and all of that. Yeah, if you're going to have a cloak, what's probably going to be easiest is going for maybe not something like this, where it's going to be difficult to get into those details there, but a more active pose. This is another great one where the cloak is kind of flowing up. You're going to have a lot of different angles that you can get in there. And that's ultimately kind of the name of the game, angles for your brushes. And the easy way to kind of check this as you're going is just move the mini around. See if there are any perspectives that you kind of can't reach certain things when you're looking at the mini on the builder. But if you do want to have something that maybe is a little bit more of a relaxed pose, let's find a good example here. That one was actually yeah, this is a good example. This is a great example. So this is a more relaxed pose. It's going to be a little bit more difficult. Here's where you probably want to come into the advanced move pose and, oh, not the arm. Bring this down and in, and just kind of double check that you're not like cutting through anything. So what I've done here is I've made it so that, now granted it might be a little difficult to get in around this tail, so I might move the tail, but I don't have to worry about painting the back of the mini essentially. I just have this cloak here, and everything else is going to be, especially right in here, we could even come down here until maybe Okay, a little bit higher. There, so there's not that light shining through. I'm not going to have to worry about trying to position my brush in between, and especially if you're painting very different colors, I oftentimes will accidentally like tap the brush on something I've already painted. That gets frustrating. You have to go back and touch it up. Whereas this, you have less of that trying to maneuver your brush in and around. Okay, so that is cloaks covered. But also you have gear and things you want to keep in mind with gear and clothing. Actually, before we go to gear, let's clear this cloak and go back to clothing. So Hero Forge has all of these really great, awesome clothing options, and I want a little bit more active of a pose. Yeah, to show this. So this is a little bit more difficult of a clothing option to hand paint, and it's because of this split opening kind of train here. You're going to have a hard time getting your brush in between the legs and the train to paint both the back of the legs as well as the train. As you're moving it around, like you can see, but it's going to be difficult to get a brush in there. You kind of want to almost come up from under, but you have the base to keep in mind. Also, there are all these things around the neck, and this creates this really cool look to the neck. I love this design of this new kind of top piece, cape, coat, whatever it is. But it's going to be a little bit more difficult to really angle your brush down and in. This one especially on the legs, because not only does it have that split train there in the front, but it also has this part hanging down so you can see all of the stuff underneath it, but it's going to be really difficult to get a paintbrush in there. You're going to have kind of less options, more chances that, you know, you might get paint on the wrong part of the mini. So if you want to kind of make it a little bit easier for yourself, what you can do is go through, you know, you don't have to go with just like a loincloth. You can go, or even just pants. But something like this is going to be a little bit easier to paint. Or even this, where there's not layers that are sitting kind of a little bit of a gap. They're really sitting right on top of them. So let's do a fun, hey, let's give this guy a kilt. That seems like a fun one. And this is going to be pretty easy to paint. You know, you're probably never going to see the inside of this kilt here, so you could just prime it black and leave it as is, or if you did want to, you could kind of bring a little bit of paint down here, but you don't have to worry about detail very much. Yeah, horns are also something to keep in mind, just kind of how they overlap with each other, as well as any top items, or top clothing pieces. So now let's get into the gear. As you're adding on gear, be mindful of how it kind of closes in the body. So let's go ahead and start with shields. I think shields are something, and just for fun, let's give them a sword. So let's do like one of these big, maybe not a blast shield, since this is more of a, yeah, let's do a big tower shield. So if you've got a big, awesome tower shield, it does kind of close off a little bit of the mini from being able to paint. You know, you're going to have less options for how you can get a paintbrush in there to paint that left side of the body. And especially if you want a pose, not that pose. Where's the pose that I want? I usually just kind of scroll through these poses a lot and see. Okay, so if we were to take this pose and say I actually wanted to angle the shield more so it looked like, oh, it's being held up in front of the body. So I'll go into advanced posing, maybe adjust the shoulder a little bit. Okay, so looking at this mini, it looks like, hey, I've got my shield up. You can only see my eyes. But what we've done is made it a bit difficult to get the inside of the shield here, as well as the insides here. You just have a few less options, and especially if you were to go and add a cloak, you know, that really makes it, you've got all this space here that you want to get in there and paint, but this is going to block a lot of your options for how to move your brush in and around. And it's also going to block a lot of your options for painting the backside of that shield. So keep that in mind as you're building your mini. The other thing to keep in mind is the dual wielding, which I think is a really awesome look. And for some of the items, like for the swords, not so bad. You might have a little bit of difficulty getting in here, and especially with this one, because it's so wide, you're going to have a bit of difficulty getting in to paint the face, and especially like that eye, you're really only going to be able to get at it from the front. Something that's narrower isn't going to block that quite as much. But also, the bow and arrow is something to keep in mind as you're building. I love the dual-handed option for the bow and arrow, but it does make trying to paint like this neck area, paint this bow, paint the inside of that hand. Even as I'm moving the mini around, you can kind of see it's hard to see those spots, but there are, from certain angles, you can definitely see those spots. And it's just going to be a little tricky to get your paintbrush in there. So, you know, maybe that's a situation of saying, hey, does this pose work better? Or maybe you do this pose, especially if you want to focus on the face, you know, keeping anything up from around the face where you're going to block it. But if you wanted to do like a tartan effect on the skirt, you wouldn't want to do this because it's going to be difficult to get in there. So this actually might allow you to get your paintbrush in and around. So keep in mind kind of where are the spots that you're going to want to do some detail or some much more controlled painting, and try and not block your paintbrush where you'll need to access that. And, you know, run through all of the different poses. See, they've got a lot of really great built-in poses in Hero Forge that can be some really active ones. Some of them, I will say, are going to be easier to paint. The more relaxed open poses are going to be easier to paint because you don't have as much like crossing over, stuff like that. As well as the crouched poses, because you're crunching the miniature down, you're shrinking the available kind of space the mini is taking up. You're going to have a few more difficulties getting a paintbrush in, especially with this 3-point landing, which looks really cool, but because the base is down here, you're just going to have a few less options for how you can maneuver your brush. So keep that in mind as you're painting. You know, maybe you want to go with more of the jumping rather than landing pose, and this will be a little bit easier to paint than this. The back's going to be super easy to paint, so if you have something that, like, I have a shield on the back or a cloak that I want to do a lot of detail on, this is going to be fine for that. If you want to do a lot of detail on the front, not only is it going to be difficult for you to paint, but also, you know, usually when you're looking at a mini, it's more from this angle or this angle, and you're not going to see that. So do yourself a favor and pick a pose that you're going to be able to show off your painting with that pose. Another thing that you want to keep in mind is how many things you have and how many things you're going to have to paint. So I'm going to pull up a miniature to show this example. Alright, so with this miniature, I have filled every single spot. There is a head item, there's eyes, there's a mouth, there are 2 things in each hand, there's things on each side. I've got both of the base items, there's something on his back. There's a lot going on with this mini, and it looks really cool, but this also can be a kind of intimidating thing to paint. And that is because there is so much going on that, especially if you don't have a clear cohesive paint scheme, you can very quickly have something that starts to look very cluttered, very chaotic. And if that's what you want to go for, great, but it also might get kind of lost a little bit on the table. But what we can do is maybe pare a few things back. I like to try and stop and think of what are the key items for my character, what are the things that I'm going to want to kind of be able to spend a little bit more time on so that I'm not, you know, dedicating hours and hours into a mini, but I can really focus in on a few things. So to do that, I might go, hey, you know, I don't really need 3 different weapons on this. So what I'm going to do is, even though that mace is really freaking cool, this character uses the gun much more than he uses the mace. So I'll get rid of that mace. Already that kind of simplifies it. Maybe instead of having 2 different base items that I not only have to paint, but also I have to maneuver around, I say, you know what? Let's get rid of that bag. So it's just that one kind of futuristic pod thing. And there's a lot going on the head. You kind of lose that it's actually an alien because there's so much going on. So I'm going to come in, not in the head, in the clothing. And we'll just get rid of that head piece. Or maybe put in a little bit of a simplified head piece. So, you know, this miniature, you have a little bit less stuff going on, so you can access things easily, as well as really focus in on the parts of the mini that you want to bring out without having it super cluttered. So let's jump over to a couple of miniatures that I made already that are kind of examples of things that might be difficult to paint. All right, so we have this first one, which might be a little difficult to paint. Again, you've got that shield that's kind of pulled up tight to the body, but there's still a bit of space here. So it's going to be a little bit difficult to paint not only the inside of the shield, but also that left side of the body and that dagger, because the hair is here and this cloak bit. Again, it's going to be a little bit difficult getting to this area, getting that back belt, and the boots with this split train. If you don't want to worry about this, you can buy it in color, and it will come to you printed in color, no worry at all. So this would be kind of maybe a little bit tricky to paint at times, also kind of getting in through some of those shoulder bits and getting that neck there, but not too bad, not too overwhelming. Now this miniature I made kind of trying to break all of the rules that I had set up. It has wings, it has that split train thing, it has base items that make it difficult, like it would be a little tricky to paint this trim here, as well as to get the backside of that glowing bit. It has a back item. It's got the quiver with arrows, and there's the hair wrapped around it, not to mention the horns, have these multi-layers. The arrow is there. There's stuff around the neck that would be a little tricky to get in with that arrow. Like, this is going to be a slightly more challenging, if not, kind of intimidating miniature to paint, as well as there's a lot of details here. There's a lot of things. I tried to go with kind of this color scheme so that it doesn't look too busy. I've got kind of these main areas of color with the wings as well as with the garments, and trying to balance the cools and reds. I think it's a really awesome mini. I don't think I would want to paint this mini because it would be a very time-intensive, I feel, miniature to paint. But I've ordered it in color, so I don't have to worry about painting it. And that's the nice thing with the color printing. You can do some of these builds that you maybe wouldn't want to do in a mini that you're going to hand paint, but because it's 3D printed in color, you don't have to worry about that. That mini is on its way to me, and once I have it, I will post some photos of it on social media so you can see what it looks like. So keep an eye out on our Twitter and Instagram for that. So head on over to heroforge.com where you can build your custom miniature. They have hundreds of different options for gear and clothing and species, and they are constantly adding new things, so make sure to check back every week for their new releases. All right, so those are my tips of things to keep in mind as you're building a miniature for painting, as well as my, like, I broke all my rules, here's the mini that does that. I hope you enjoyed this video, hope you got something out of it, and I'd love to hear what your favorite miniature that you've built on Hero Forge is, and you know, feel free to share any photos, stuff like that with us. All right, I'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye! Stopped the screen recording. Stop the audio. Stop the camera. Third takes the chart.